like to welcome you on behalf of Independence National Historic Park. We're going to be going on a tour of Independence Hall. Now the tour is 25 minutes long once we're in Independence Hall. And they're not quite ready for us just yet. So I'm just going to take a couple minutes and point out to you on this map some of the other buildings that are in the park that you might be visiting while you're here in Philadelphia. What I point out to you is free and open to the public. You can go there on your own. It's just that Independence Hall is by tour only because of security. The intersection right here is 5th Street and Chestnut. Okay, so it's 5th and Chestnut. We are in the east wing of Independence Hall. We will go 2 blocks over on Chestnut, going towards the river. Come on in, join us. There's plenty of seats. Probably while I'm talking, people will be joining us. We take tours every 15 minutes, whether we have 85 people or not. A lot of times we do have 85 people. Okay, so at 30th Chestnut Street, making a right-hand turn, there's a big modern brick building. It's the Visitor Center. And there's a movie called Independence. It's 28 minutes long, played continuously throughout the day. Also, there's restrooms, a water cooler, and a bookstore. Okay, and then continuing on Chestnut Street, the Army Navy Museum, Marine Corps, and further down the cobblestone path is Carpenter's Hall. Now, during the early days, we were all British colonies, and there came up some problems with Britain, and so there was a decision made. The delegates from all the colonies would get together in Philadelphia, and they met in 1774 in Carpenter's Hall. And they were talking about colonial rights and some of the problems that they were having. We're going to discuss that a little bit more in Independence Hall. Crossing Chestnut, walking down the cobblestone path is Franklin Court, the Underground Museum. And then going up towards Market Street, the print shop. Continuing on Chestnut, Second Bank of the United States, that's a portrait gallery. And many of those portraits are over 200 years old. Right on the corner of 5th and Chestnut is Old City Hall, Congress Hall on the other side, and Independence Hall right in the center. And we're going to be going over there shortly. Right across the street, right across Chestnut Street, the Pavilion for the Liberty Bell. And then going over Market towards 7 is the Grant House, the Declaration House. Now that's a reconstruction of the house that Thomas Jefferson stayed in when he drafted the Declaration of Independence. And we know that he was the author. There were 56 signers. Half those men were trained in law or were lawyers like Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. But then we had some merchants, farmers, a minister, and several physicians. And these men came from diverse backgrounds. They were able to unite in a cause for freedom. 11 years later, there was a federal convention in Philadelphia. We call it the Constitutional Convention. Well, back then, they called it the Federal Convention of 1787. And this is one artist's version of the signing of the United States Constitution. Now, you might recognize the faces of some of the men in this painting. George Washington from Virginia, he presided over the sessions. And James Madison, also from Virginia, he's often been called the father of our Constitution because of the many detailed notes he had taken during the sessions. Our dear friend Benjamin Franklin. Anybody want to guess how old he was at the signing of the Constitution?
81.
Okay, 81, that's right. The oldest man to sign. Most of the men were in their 40s. The average age was just about 43 years old. Now, the youngest man to sign, Jonathan Dayton, he was a lawyer from New Jersey. He was 26. When we are in the assembly room, the second room we will be visiting, I will point out to you 2 original objects. The chair that George Washington sat in and the Philipsing inkstand, which was used for the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And then 11 years later, for the signing of the United States Constitution. The other objects that you'll see, like the pewter inkstands, the books, and the walking cane, which was a status symbol during the 18th century. The snuff boxes, used for tobacco. These are what we call period objects. They're very old. They're from the 18th century, and they're used to help set the scene so that you can get an idea of what the room looked like during the early days. Now, we do request that our groups stay together because there's a number of groups going through the building at the same time that we are. Also, folks, you can come in and join us. Also, you'll want to gather all of your belongings because we will not be returning to the East Wing. I would like to welcome everyone to the Pennsylvania State House building, for when this was first being built in 1732, that's what it was called, the Pennsylvania State House building. It didn't get the name of Independence Hall until much later. In 1732, this was the outskirts of the city. The population was 11,500 people, and this was built to house the colonial government, the three branches. Judicial branch here, legislative branch would meet across the hall in the Pennsylvania Assembly Room, and the executive branch upstairs where the governor has council chamber. Now during the early days, we were a British colony, and so it was here that the laws of England were administered up until the American Revolution. After the Revolution, this became the court for the new state of Pennsylvania. When a person had been accused of a crime, they would be brought to court. And there could be anywhere from 1 to 5 judges, depending on the seriousness of the crime. Where do you think the judges would be sitting? Exactly. Judges would be sitting right up there. A witness giving testimony and a clerk taking notes. Traditionally, in England, all the lawyers gathered around the common table. So you would have the prosecution and the defense sharing the same table. Unlike our American courtrooms today, which are separated. There could be 1 of 2 juries. A grand jury consisted of 24 men, ranging in age from 21 years to 70 years. They were seated to my right and my left. They would determine whether or not there was enough evidence for a trial. Now, a petty jury, consisting of 12 men who were here, they determined the verdict, the guilt or innocence at a trial. Who do you think was in here? The accused. Right. The person who was accused of a crime was in the prisoner's dock. That is what this is called. Now, the person might be accused of murder, treason, stealing, and they were considered innocent until proven guilty. Again, this is something you won't find in an American courtroom, because we got rid of this. The person would stand during the entire court proceedings. You heard the expression stand trial? Well, literally they did. Because you don't see a chair in here, and neither did they. There were spectators during the early days, and they would be standing right where you are. And just like people visiting today are from different ethnic backgrounds and walks of life, that was true during the early days too. I would like to direct your attention to the one original object in this room, the painting. The painting is very old. It dates back to 1785. It's the Pennsylvania coat of arms, and it symbolizes the authority of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. But it wasn't always in that place, because during the early colonial days, it was King George III, royal coat of arms that was hanging there. And if you were in this courtroom on July 8, 1776, after the first public reading of the Declaration of Independence, which took place right out in the State House yard, you would have seen members from the Committee of Safety storm in here, tear down the royal coat of arms. They dragged it through the streets of Philadelphia. What do you think they did with it that night? Burned it. That's right. Threw it on a bonfire. Many people, that was considered to be an act of treason. And they always talked of the men who were meeting across the hall in the assembly room. They were committing crimes because they were talking about independence and greatness with Britain, the mother country. Before we step across the hall to the assembly room, did anybody have any questions or comments about this room? Now, sitting right across the hall, I would like to welcome you to the Pennsylvania Assembly Room. And it was here that members of the Pennsylvania Assembly would meet and make their laws during the early colonial days. They offered the use of this room to the delegates of the First Continental Congress, but those delegates declined. Instead, they took their meetings to Carpenter's Hall because they believed they would have more privacy there. Now, they were talking about colonial rights, airing their grievances against the king, discussing issues like taxation without representation. They weren't looking for solutions. They wanted to patch up their differences with the king, and they would decide to meet the following year to see how things were coming along with the king and the colonies. And so it was May the 10th, 1775, that this was the scene of the Second Continental Congress. Delegates from each of the 13 colonies were in attendance here, and each man tended to reflect the attitudes and interests of his particular region. Now, the fighting at Lexington and Concord had taken place a month earlier, and the solutions that were desired by the First Continental Congress hadn't been obtained. So these delegates provided for a continental army. And at that time, the colonel from Virginia, George Washington, was designated to be commander-in-chief of that army. There were many battles that took place that year. And then the following year, in 1776, the clearest call for independence came on June the 7th, when the delegate from Virginia, Richard Henry Hayes, stood and offered a resolution stating that these united colonies are and ought to be free and independent. Now, this led to a committee of 5 men being appointed to draft the Declaration. There was Thomas Jefferson, lawyer from Virginia; Benjamin Franklin, statesman from Pennsylvania; Roger Sherman, politician from Connecticut; Robert Livingston from New York; and John Adams from Massachusetts. Out of the 5 men, it was young 33-year-old Thomas Jefferson who was selected to write the Declaration. Now, he would write that Declaration in just about 2 weeks, and it was read here. It consisted of a statement of basic human rights, a list of grievances against the king, and a statement of separation from England. The delegates would go through the Declaration paragraph by paragraph, sometimes making changes, sometimes deleting certain clauses, like they did with the slave trade clause. That was an important one, and it was deleted from the Declaration. July the 2nd, the Declaration was adopted. 2 days later, July the 4th, the final form of the Declaration of Independence was voted upon and approved, and at that time, the United States was created. The Declaration was sent out to be engrossed on parchment. When it returned, August the 2nd, one by one, the delegates would step forward, and using that inkstand, they would sign their names to the Declaration of Independence, pledging their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. So these men who came from diverse backgrounds were able to unite in the cause for freedom. Now, there were other important things that took place in this room, because in 1781, we had the adoption of the Articles of Confederation. The Articles had their faults. Before the times, they were the logical form of government. It's just that during that time, we didn't have a president, we didn't have a court system, and the states were having a lot of problems. And so it was, in 1787, 55 American leaders gathered here to strengthen a young and troubled nation. It was George Washington, the hero from the American Revolution. He was elected to preside over the sessions, and he would sit in that chair. All the states were represented except for Rhode Island. They refused to send a delegate to the convention, and the convention lasted for 4 months. They debated about different issues. Again, the slave trade issue would surface, but what seemed to cause the delegates the most challenges. First, I want to mention, I think I forgot to mention, that one of the first orders of business was to establish the 3 branches of government: the executive branch, legislative branch, and judicial branch. And it seemed to be that the legislative branch of government caused the delegates the most challenges, because there was talk that in Congress, the states were going to be represented according to population. Well, this made the small states feel very threatened by the large states. So there was a compromise. There would be two parts to Congress. In the House of Representatives, the states would be apportioned according to population, whereas in the Senate, equal representation. 2 members from each state. This would help to satisfy the small states and the large states. And that settlement has been called the Great Compromise, sometimes termed the Connecticut Compromise, because Roger Sherman, who contributed greatly to it, was from Connecticut. September the 17th, 39 men would sign their names to the United States Constitution using that ink stand. At the closing of that federal convention, Pennsylvania's leading citizen, Benjamin Franklin, who sat at this table, would remark to his nearby delegates that he often looked at the chair that George Washington sat in, and he wondered whether the design of the sun, if it was a rising sun or a setting sun. Well, with the talks that took place here in signing the Constitution, Franklin had optimism for the new nation. He would tell his nearby delegates that it was a rising sun. Since then, this chair has been called the Rising Sun Chair. So, you can see why, to many people, this is considered to be the most historic room in the entire United States, because this is the room that the Declaration of Independence was signed and the United States Constitution was signed. Now folks, I would like to show you more of the building, but before we turn around and go upstairs to the second floor, does anybody have any questions or comments about this room? Okay, this door was used actually to go into another room, okay? And the other one just had like a little closet area. Now, sometimes I'm asked about the chandelier. The chandelier dates back to 1745. It was made in England, and it is similar to what was here during the early days. But there's just 2 original objects, the chair and the inkstand. Okay, folks, we're just going to party room. This room is 20 feet by 100 feet. There's a fireplace on each end. And during the early colonial days, this was used for dinners and banquets on festive occasions. Now somebody might say, well, what would be a reason that they might celebrate? Well, one of the occasions was the king's birthday. They would dine and then be entertained. Somebody would be playing the harpsichord, which was popular during the mid-18th century. But this room had other uses, because during 1777 and 1778, when George Washington had his winter encampment up at Valley Forge with the Continental forces, the British occupied Philadelphia, and this room was used as a prison for the American prisoners of war. Now, some of those men were wounded, and the men who died were buried at a local potter's field, which is now called Washington Square. It's right at 7th and Walnut Streets, and that's where the tomb of the unknown soldier of the Revolutionary period is. And then years later, by 1802, this was used by Charles Willson Peale, who was a prominent artist in the late 18th century. He had this as his museum, and he had a lot of things here, but he featured the portraits of the men that we've been talking about, who came from the 13 different colonies, like the signers of the Constitution, signers of the Declaration. And a lot of people would be visiting to see the portraits of these famous men. Now, when we were downstairs, I mentioned to you the governor's council chamber, and that is the room that's on my right. The governor would meet with dignitaries and Indian delegates in the very elegant surroundings. The room that's on my left, I'll be opening up those doors. That was the library for the Pennsylvania Assembly. But that had other uses too, because there were times when the city of Philadelphia stored military arms and supplies in that room, and so today it reflects those uses. There's a collection of muskets in there. The ones that are by the wall are reproductions. The one that's on the table is from the 18th century. I'm going to be playing a tape of harpsichord music so that you'll have a chance to hear just how that sounds. And during that time, you can look at these rooms. If you have questions, please come to me. I will try to answer your questions. But when the music is over, that's to indicate that the tour is over, and you could start on your way down the stairs and exit out the back door because another group will be coming up. I would like to thank everyone for your attention. I hope you enjoyed the rest of your visit here. And remember, when you return to Philadelphia, come back and see us again. Have a good day.